Bill Walker was one of the most decorated footballers ever in the history of Australian football. In fact, his first 3 seasons in league football were premierships, and that was a wonderful way to start his career. He played from 1961 to 1976 as a player and a coach with the Swan Districts Football Club, 16 seasons in all, and he was president of the club from 1983 to 1994, a period of 12 years. He was a rover of the highest class. He came down from Narrabeen, and he did all the things that the great rovers do, and the extras he had going for him. He was smart and he was strong, and I doubt that there's ever been a stronger rover in the history of football in Australia. Maybe throwing wheat bags around on the farm had something to do with that. In all, Billy played 305 games with Swan Districts. He played 14 final round games. He played in 4 grand finals for 3 premierships, 61, 62 and 63, a hat-trick. He was captain coach of Swan Districts from 1969, 70 and 71. He won 4 Sandover medals, a hat-trick of medals in 65, 66 and 67, and then another one in 1970. He was runner-up to Barry Cable in 1969, I might add. He was 5 times Swan District's first and best, 65, 66, 68, 69 and 70, runner-up in 64 and 67. He won the Simpson Medal for a magnificent performance in 1967 against South Australia at Subi, when West Australia beat South Australia by something like 15 goals. He was Daily News Footballer of the Year in 1966 and 67. He was the ABC Footballer of the Year in 1966. He was the TVW Channel 7 Footballer of the Year in 1965 and 1968. He was the WA Sportsman of the Year. He won the Lindy Award in 1966 and 1967. He was inducted into the Hall of Champions in 1987 as a life member of the Swan Districts Football Club. He played in 21 state games. He was picked in the All-Australian side in the 1969 Adelaide Championships. He played 12 games for Australia against Ireland, which must be some sort of a record. He was awarded life membership of the West Australian Football League in 1985 and an Order of Australia Medal, an OAM, in 1982. He was president of the Swan Districts Football Club for 12 years, 83 to 94, vice president 1980 to 1982 under John Cooper, and it's history now that John Cooper started the leg of the second hat-trick of premierships for Swan Districts. And while he was president, Bill Walker had 3 premierships, 83, 84 and 90. And that is some record, but I thought it really worth reading out. And Bill, that record must give you a great deal of satisfaction.
Well, a lot of reminiscing can be done with it, Spud. I've had a lot of enjoyment out of the 40-odd years I've been involved at the club.
Well, this is the 40th year. You came down in 1961.
Is that right?
And I want to take you right back before you came down, Billy, because it's interesting to know where you came from. I mean, you were from Narrabeen. Initially, you were from New Zealand.
Yeah, I was born in New Zealand. Mum and Dad were over there on holidays. The Dad was working over there, I should say, for about 7 years, and I came along while they were over there in a town called Huntley.
And there was no football played there, wasn't there?
No, and not enough time either.
What age were you when you came to Western Australia?
I was only maybe 2 or 3 years of age, Spud.
You went to Narrabeen Primary School and Merredin High School. Did you show some form there?
Yeah, a chap who played for Swans called Brian Curry presented me with my first ever little trophy. It was a little football on the stand. I won it in a carnival at Narrabeen against the surrounding towns' primary schools, as they used to have in those days. I suppose about 12.
And you showed your first form in the Bruce Rock Narrabeen Association. They used to have, I think, carnivals, country carnivals in those days, and you had some success. Yes,
the carnivals was really the forerunner to what they call the country championship in Perth now. It was the Northern Carnival, of which there were some 30-odd associations just to get there. And it was the big event of the year, and I was fortunate enough to be selected in the carnival side, which is the combined side of Bruce Rock, Narrabeen, Quallion, Shackleton, Muntaj and Ardith. There was 2 teams in Narrabeen at that time, 2 in Bruce Rock. Nowadays there's only 2 teams in the whole association now. So they were very strong. They had a lot of players. Don Langdon was in the side and his brothers, and Brian Curry's and quite a few guys who had played in Perth, different stages, local boys. So it was a very big event, and I was fortunate enough to win the Slater medal, which is the fairest and best for the whole carnival in the A section. And the same year I also won the fairest and best in the grand final, of which we won.
Did you always play with Narrabeen?
No, I played 1 year with Bruce Rock and one with Narrabeen, and I played for a club, an association called the Leonora Gawler Association, of which there were 2 teams. We played each other every other week. And I played up there when I was working in the shearing teams and working underground up at the Sons of Gawler in about 59, I think it was. I was only a young fellow.
I ask you that question because you're very strong on loyalty. I mean, 305 games with Swan Districts. You had offers from all around Australia, but you always stayed loyal to Swans.
Well, in those days, Keith, there was only a few players, like Polly went across when he was 28, 29, Barry Cable done the same, Dennis Marshall went across at 26 or whatever it might have been. So there wasn't a great deal of movement between Western Australia and Victoria in those days.
Well, you couldn't get a clearance anyway.
In those days it was a bit hard. Dennis Marshall would testify for that one.
Now, how did you get down to Swan Districts? Because I would think after your success and Rovers being so important to sides, how did you get to Swans with, say, 7 other clubs chasing you?
Well, it boiled down to mainly good advice by my father. We spoke to most of the clubs. West Perth was my club at that time, being a country boy. They were my club, which I used to follow. I trained with East Fremantle and was interviewed by most of the other clubs, East Perth and all the rest. And most of the clubs at that stage had either top rovers or state rovers playing for them. The reason I didn't go to East Fremantle because Trizzy Lawrence and Oscar Howard were playing for them. West Perth had Joe Fanchi and Peter Medhurst. And you could go through all the clubs and they all had top rovers. And I was only coming down for the 1 year because everyone said I was too small, and but I had, I guess, a passion to prove people wrong even in those days. And I come down to try myself out, and the obvious club from my father's point of view was a guy called Bunton had come across from over east who was going to be captain coach.
Did you know about Bunton at that stage?
I hadn't
Junior?
heard of him. No, I didn't know anything about him. And he was certainly going to get a game being captain coach. But the other chaps who were playing for Swans at that stage, I'd played against them a couple of years prior to that, and when Swans came to Bruce Rock to play our association side. So I'd played against them as a 16-year-old, and I had a fair idea that I had a fair chance against those guys, even though they were a bit older than I was. So I had an even chance of at least getting a game at Swans, and that's a chap called Brian Gray, who was a Narrabeen guy, and Brian Curry. So that's the reason I joined Swans.
Billy, you were almost jockey weight, but strength was always a great part of your repertoire. I mean, you were a very hard guy to tackle. Did that come from working on the farm and in the mines and shearing and all the things you did?
Yeah, most of my life I've always been a physical worker, and in my younger days very much so. As a lot of young fellows, we took a little bit of pride out of being able to lift things around the place on the farms, and I started very young working on the farms and doing that sort of manual work. So there was no weights around in those days, so I think I was just naturally strong, and my game allowed me to get inside the packs and get out with being very strong in the arms. There was a great article by Ken Casellas and comparing myself with Barry Cable, and the headlines were something like strength against class, and that was a fair indication of the difference between the two of us.
But he was strong for his size also. He developed a very strong tackler.
Yeah, Barry developed his strength over a period of time. He was a stronger player as the older he got, because he used to pump the weights and do a lot of weights once he started to become a good player. And he became a very strong player as a rover. But in the early parts of it all, he certainly wasn't as strong as he was at the end. It's
a wonderful rivalry between the two of you. Did you enjoy those contests?
Yeah, I think I enjoyed them as much as Barry did. I think it was something we both set out to do when we played against each other, and I think that it enhanced both our performances, because there was always, by the papers, a great deal of rivalry, and I think there's a lot of personal pride in it, and Barry's a bit more outspoken than I was in those days. And,
just a little.
So we had a rivalry there, but it was a good one because we've always got on well off the track, on state trips or socially where it is now.
I suppose something I forgot to mention earlier was your magnificent goal prowess. You were a great goal kicker. In fact, if we can start talking about 1961 when you first came down, you used to kick goals from all angles, either foot. That was a natural thing?
Yeah, I used to practice a lot. A chap called Jimmy Conway helped me a little bit. He showed me how to do a couple of screws, which I didn't know about. But Keith, you would remember those days. If I didn't kick goals, I wasn't in the side the following week because I was in the forward line most of the time. And that was my role, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Do you remember the first time you met Hayden Button?
Yeah, yes I do, yeah. I met him.
You'd already been signed at that stage?
I'd just been signed, and Button had been announced as captain coach, and we're standing in a group, and Tommy Moyler took me across and introduced me to Button. And so I forget who the other person was that was talking about, oh, you'll be right, you've got 7 or 8 good players from last year. And he just looked at me and he just said, now I've got 8. And so whether he had checked me out or what, I don't know, but that was quite an honour for him to say something like that.
He was pretty thorough.
Yeah, he was. He's like all good coaches. You know, John Todd, go right back to him. They're always very thorough in their assessment of players.
Well, I don't think you played any reserves games.
Yeah, I did. I played one.
Did you really?
I played one. Yeah, I was out with an injury for about 5 or 6 weeks, and I played one reserve game against Perth. And on a comeback, Button made us play one game.
Well, we've all learned something. But 61 was a great year, Billy. I mean, from last to first, and I did interview Jack Sheedy not long ago, and he said that was the best East Perth side they'd ever put on the field in the 61 grand final.
Well, they'd proved it all year. They'd whacked us something terrible in the prelims, and they'd beaten us each game we'd played, even though we were quite competitive with them. So yeah, on paper they had an outstanding side. I reckon we may have won a premiership a year before we really should have done, and I reckon we snuck that one in. But you know, it's no different to today's football. It's a mind game. They went in cocksure of themselves, and we're in there having a go.
I remember Hayden Button always saying we could only beat that side once during the year.
Is that right?
And he sort of kept all the cards up his sleeve for the grand final.
Yeah. Well, for the first time he roved, he and I,
exactly.
For practically the whole game. And he put me back in the pocket every now and again and then called me straight up on the ball, and he never went off the ball. So, yeah, that threw them a bit because Dobby Graham couldn't handle midfield.
Well, you got him a bit frustrated, Bill.
Yes, he did get a bit frustrated, Dob. Yeah. I think I kicked 6 goals that game. I'm not too
Well, you
sure.
kicked 61 goals for the season.
Right.
You were the best first-year player, the West Australian best first-year player. So it was a wonderful way to start your league career.
Well, it kept me going, I believe, because I was, as much as people joke about it, but I really was a year-to-year proposition, and that year was just to come down and improve it, but prove that I could play league football. But as the year went on, it got into my blood, and I become, what would you call it?
Addicted.
Addicted is the word. Yeah, addicted to league football.
Well, 62 and 63 was nice to win premierships in 62 and 63 because I'm sure a lot of people thought 61 was a fluke.
Yeah, well, we went on to prove that we were a very, very good side, and equal to any side it's played in waffle football in those days.
Yeah, 62, is that the best one side, do you think?
Oh, it's hard to compare size,
It is.
Spud. You know, Button never changed his teams a great deal, as one of our problems after 65. And we never kept building up a base, which we found out later on was essential because we had that bad trot from 66 onwards for several years. So the 61, 2 and 3 sides and 64 sides never really changed a great deal in personnel.
No. 63 was interesting because we never had the greatest of years and we struggled into the first semi-final. But once the final started, I thought it was a different Swan District side.
Yeah, we're a very confident side in those days.
And then in 64, the wheels fell off. Button didn't stay. Oh, he did stay for 64.
64,
yeah.
Yep.
And I think that year, Billy, if I remember right, Swans won their first 8 games and they never got into the finals.
Yeah, we were unbeatable in the first part of the year. And I think it was 10 or 11 players made the state team, state squad. And out of those 10 or 11 players, 9 of them come back and never played very much football towards the end of the season. And the wheels just fell off. We never got it back on again.
It was incredible at the start you had that you never made the finals.
That's right, yes. Yep.
Now, in '64 you made your interstate debut for Western Australia.
In
1964 on the tour.
No, 62 was my first year in state football.
Was it really?
62. I sat on the bench against South Australia.
Right.
At the Subiaco Oval.
Right. And '64 you went on the tour.
Yes.
That was Melbourne.
Yes.
A thumping.
Yes.
Adelaide a win. Hobart a big win.
Yeah.
And Hobart.
And
Adelaide a thumping.
Right.
And
Yes.
I think we all had the flu or something.
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't a good tour at all.
In '65, now that was a resurgence. Fred Castledine took over, and he proved to be quite successful as a coach.
Yeah, well, Fred had the aftermath of a disappointing '64 season, of which a lot of those players I spoke about were injured and frustrated and couldn't play, and he took a different tack to Button, and not the hard grind of pre-season. He just lightened everybody completely off, and changed the training methods, and the enthusiasm come back into the players. Once again, we were the better side for the year, and we got beaten in the grand final.
Well, what happened in that grand final? I mean, I didn't see the game. I was playing cricket at the time, I remember, but you had a handy lead to kick with the breeze in the last quarter, three-quarter time.
Yeah. One of the reasons we lost the grand final because a bloke called Slater wasn't there. he ducked off to make a quid somewhere else, and we I think we were about 5 goals up, going with the breeze, which used to be a big factor at Subiaco Oval in those days, and we got run over by a very enthusiastic. They went for their shots, and they paid dividend. Quite a few of the guys got a few injuries. You couldn't take them on and off the ground in those days. But a couple of funny incidences. Freddie Woods was umpiring, and I'd won the Sandover medal that day.
That was your first Sandover? My
first one, yeah. And Big Bob Johnson was getting a lot of marks up the front. Toby Watson and young Biffin, not Ray, his brother Barry Biffin was winning on the wing, and Imrie was knocking it straight to those fellas. And I was running around on one leg trying to get somebody to start a bit of a wrestle. And Freddie Woods kept coming up to me and telling me he was going to report me all the time. And I couldn't get anybody to stop their roll. It was quite an incredible day. One which we all like to forget, like East Perth did in '61.
I remember you and I and Peter Eakins and Tony Casserly through North Corps did a tour of the Northwest.
That's correct.
And we only had one football field with us.
That's right.
We must have seen that game 20 times.
Yes, and guess where it ended up?
In your lap.
Yeah, but it ended up in the Alligator River up there somewhere, the last night.
Well, you were fairest and best for Swans that year, won the Sandover medal, and really your whole life had changed.
Yeah, it did, yes. At '65, I then made decisions there. I'd hand over the family farm, my share of the family farm, to my brother, and I basically become a permanent resident in Perth to make a future for myself down here, and at that stage playing football.
It's been a hell of a contribution to football, Bill. We're going to get onto that a bit later on, but this is your 40th year down here. Do you realise that?
Yes, I've lived longer in the Swan Valley than I have at Narrabeen, which is regarded as my hometown, and I've been out in the Swan Valley. They tell me another couple of years and I'll be called a Walkovich. I'll join the locals.
Well, West Australia had success at state level that year, '65. We beat the Vics here on the Saturday and lost a close game on the Tuesday.
That's correct.
And you're involved in that.
That's right. Yes.
And '66, sixth, I think Swans were that year. Not a lot of success in 1966. You won your second Sandover medal and the second fairest and best for Swans. And you're always also selected for the carnival side in Hobart. And I would think that really was, from a personal point of view, a disappointment for you.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people say to you, gee, you played your football, and young players in particular, I like to bring it up that everybody gets disappointments, no matter what level of football you play and no matter how good you are. There is a section of your football career which really bugs you, or it is a great disappointment. And the carnival in Hobart was, I guess, my biggest disappointment. I went across there with with Cable and won the medal the year before and had a reasonable form, and regarded as two of the better rovers in Australia. And my aim at that carnival was to be in the All-Australian side. And Kevin Murray was coaching at the time, and I think you were vice captain of the side. And in those past years, all players got a game in carnivals. That was the way the selectors used to do it, to make sure everybody got a game in them. And there was a young fellow called Keithy Donkin, who was a great player for East Perth, come down only for a short period of time, but was a great player for East Perth. And we played the VFA in our first game over there. And the selectors made a decision that they had to give young Keith a game, because we then had Victoria and South Australia to play after that. And so I guess the toss of the coin went against myself, and Barry and Keith got the nod to play. And young Keith went on and played outstanding and kicked 6 goals from a half forward and roving. And Barry played a very good game of football as well. So I became a pretty good reserve for the next couple of games, and consequently never made the All-Australian side. If the reverse had happened and I'd got a game against the VFA, more than likely would have struck enough form to stay in there and had a chance of making an All-Australian side. Yeah. But he was a great player, young Keith, and thoroughly deserved his form, and the carnival was excellent.
And All-Australian selection.
He got Keith and Barry got the 2 All-Australian rovers. It
was an incredible situation. I mean, he was played against the VFA, one of the weaker sides in the competition, just to blood him.
That's right.
I mean, there was no thought of him playing in the later games,
no.
but he was BOG, kicked 6 goals, and
you couldn't leave him out.
Couldn't leave him out.
No, and that's the way football goes. Yeah. But they're the sort of disappointments that spur you on, because I came back and I won another Sandover medal. I was fairly determined.
You, I think you got onto the wing in one of the games, didn't you?
Yeah, that was my. I think in the first 10 state games I played 3/4 of those on a wing.
Did you really?
Yes. My first state game against South Australia, I come on the wing and played against Kenny Eustace.
I remember he was captain of South Australia.
Yeah, he played on the wing against us.
So 66 was a good year for you. I mean, you won everything in sight, but really a disappointment at Hobart.
Yeah.
In a great carnival.
Oh, great carnivals. All of them were great carnivals. Ones I've played in 2, and that was a great carnival.
They were wonderful to play in, Bill, weren't they? In those days, I mean, we were just part-time footballers compared to the boys today, but when you got away for 2 weeks, eating, sleeping and breathing football, I mean, your football just improved, and your comradeship improved, and there were some great games played.
And one of the reasons why I guess there wasn't a great deal of movements between West Australia and going to Victoria, there was really nothing to prove to go over and play there in the mud and the cold with the facilities we had here, because we used to play against them often enough to prove that we were equal to the guys over there.
Yeah, the only place we couldn't play against them well was on the MCG, and that was so foreign to us, that surface, we couldn't quite handle that.
Yes, no, I've spent a few times in the mud over there, and in the last game I played, the last game on the MCG, we nearly beat the Vics on the MCG.
Dempsey saved them.
Yep, Dempsey saved them in the back line. Yeah.
Well, 67, that was my last year in football. I came back from Subiaco, so I had the privilege of playing with you guys under Fred, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but we didn't do very well in 67. We ran 6th, but the eventual premiers were Perth, and the 3 times we played them that year we beat them.
We did too. Much to the ire of Malcolm Apple. He was their coach at the stage. And yeah, I think they went on to win a premiership and had 3 years in a row, I think, Perth at that stage.
It was a good year for you, 67. You won another Sandover. That was a
hat-trick.
Yeah,
I thought that was my better year, 67. I thought I had a more consistent year all the year. And yeah.
Well, Billy, a hat-trick of Sandovers, never been done before and has never been done since. And that's a real feather in your cap.
Well, I guess in those days it was pretty competitive too, Keith. You had a lot of challenges every week. There was good rovers in most of the sides. If you go through the Western Australia at that stage era, I suppose, had some of the best rovers in Australia. Some very good rovers playing in Western Australia through that era.
By 67 standards, was it a lucrative year for you because you won the Lindy Award and you won the Daily News Footballer of the Year? Was there much money in those awards in those days, or was it a fridge? Or
no, not much money, Keith. You know, we joke about it now. The Mr. Taxman used to come along and want to see all the little kettles and Ronson cigarette lighters and all the rest, you'd won and try and put a price on them and try and hit you for some tax. No, there certainly wasn't any money. Well, that's unfair, because Stevie Marsh will definitely tell you that in his day he had to go in there with a few words thrown in, had to go and pay to watch himself play. And one day I was getting a motor car. So I guess there was money in the game from the point of view of winning prizes, because Channel 7 was quite prominent, and their awards were motor cars and yachts and stuff like this. So yeah, there was money in the game if you won a few awards.
But there wasn't big money in the awards that you won?
No.
We went to Melbourne in '67,
Yes.
and we didn't perform too badly, but we didn't win.
No, well, not many sides. I've seen some great sides go to Melbourne and fall under the spell of that cricket pitches, which were by mid-May, June was just a quagmire, as was Adelaide Oval for us. It was very difficult for Western Australian sides to handle those sort of conditions.
Was it '67 when I failed to shepherd John Schultz?
Yes, Schultz, he still talks to me about it, Spud. Still talks to me about it. Pity they haven't got some films of that. I'd tell you how bad you were. Yeah, I was the only man Schultz he ever shirt-fronted in a 300-game career, I think.
Well, I did have him covered, but I thought once you got the ball you'd be all right. He did the splits in the middle of the Melbourne mud and
Yes.
caught John Schultz up the middle.
I took my old dad across there when he was about 80 years of age to watch a grand final in Melbourne. He'd never been to Melbourne, and I took him out on they allowed us out on the ground. I took him out to the spot where I copped it.
Well, '68, I suppose, was a bit of a new era for Swans, because Bunton had gone, Fred had gone, Tony Nesbitt took over as coach, and so it was really starting again.
Well, even Fred had started rebuilding, because we'd gone through an era where the club hadn't, and it was bad administration in those days, they hadn't looked at the long-term recruitment of the club, and we all thought it would never end. And so coaches like Nezzy and Fred at the end of his career really paid the penalty of no recruiting for a few years. And Nezzy worked very hard to rebuild the club. His own performance that year was quite outstanding. His effort was, he was a great player, Nezzy.
He was. He was one of the real motivators in our side.
Yeah, I used to love hearing him say, "Don't worry about him, Bill, I'll look after him." And
Marvellous.
crunch, I'd be going for the ball. If somebody got a bit rough with us, he'd just pick them off and with a clean shepherd. But they wouldn't whack you behind the head the next time.
And, you know, I do a bit of coaching these days, and I refer to Nesbitt so often at the centre bounce downs,
Oh yeah.
where his only thought was once we'd won the ball, then he would look around to see who he could sort of knock out of the way to make sure. And quite often you and Bunton would be running away from the middle, and Tony Nesbitt has run into someone, and or two blokes on occasion.
Yeah, I got a lot of kudos, and so did Bunton, because of the work done by Nezzy and Castledine, because they, a bit like the modern day today where there's a lot of shepherding, they used to do an awful amount of body work for us smaller players to get through, and gave you confidence to go into the packs and to get out. They were very good players. They would be outstanding players in today's
And it gave you confidence, Bill, to take the ball above head when it was necessary.
Yeah, yep. A lot of rovers tend to take it chest high, just give it protection to protect the ball. But I was always taught, because I was so small, the quicker you got in there, you got into the space left by your ruckman, and if you could take it at head height, you're always a step in front of the guy who's waiting for it to get him around the chest. By taking it at head height, you left yourself very exposed. And knowing full well that once I took the ball, I could bring it down, but I knew as soon as I took it down, Nezzy and Castledine would have cleared a path for us.
No centre square in those days?
No, it was pretty congested, but we seemed to get through it okay.
Bill, I want to take you back to '67 because I forgot one of your really great games, a Simpson medal against South Australia. That was, we beat South Australia by about 13 goals, but you're absolutely scintillating that day. Do you rate that as one of your better performances?
In state football, I do, yeah.
In any football?
No, well, I thought I played some other better games than that, but that would have been as good a state game that I'd played, and particularly up until then. But that particular side had some very good young players in it. Sid Jackson went on to play great for Carlton. There were a lot of young players brought into the state team that particular year, and they were very good players. But South Australia, as on most occasions when they came to Western Australia in those days, they battled to handle our pace. They brought over rovers who were very good players in South Australia who used to be able to run very straight and very strong with the mud, and they gave us a hard time when we went to South Australia. But in the open spaces where we could use our pace and our skill, we used to nearly always beat the South Australian. But this particular day was one of those days where it all fell into place, and it was, I had a fairly good day that day.
We didn't beat South Australia often in Adelaide, and they didn't often beat us here.
No, for the reasons.
In fact, in '68, they beat us in Adelaide, I remember.
Yeah, yep. That was for the reasons I've just stated to you. You know, and we had some very good rovers. The state selectors in those days used to try and select a Leslie Mummy who was strong and for that type of football, and they performed reasonably well in those conditions over there, but not in the against us fleeter-footed people.
Yeah.
In Western Australia.
Yeah, we did. On the score of pace, we certainly had it on them.
Yep.
We put up a good performance, or I didn't know, I mean, I was finished by then, but West Australia put up a very good performance against Victoria in '68 too. I think it was about 9 points at the finish. But
that was on the MCG, I think it was, wasn't it? Was that the last?
That was at Subi.
At Subi, was it?
I think
right.
it was at Subi, yeah.
Right. Yeah, we had to, that would have been the day that Bobby Spargo won the
No, that was '65 in kick six.
Oh.
Yeah, I just remember a very good performance
Right.
from the whole side. It was just another one of those. In fact, the games against Victoria in those days on Subi Oval were outstanding.
Oh, they were.
I mean, '63 I think was 1 point. '65 we beat them.
Yeah.
'68 we've beaten by 9 points. I mean, anywhere away from the MCG we could almost handle the Bigs.
Well, that goes back to what we said earlier on about the reason why a lot of players in my era didn't go to Melbourne, because we had those particular games where we could prove ourselves against the best of them. And I guess I got my greatest lesson from a bloke called Bobby Skilton in one of those early games against Victoria, and it was a day where he and I was fairly quiet on the ground in my first few years of playing the game, and he never stopped ordering the ruckman what to do and where to place the ball. And when he had the ball, he would tell players where to run to because he was going to put the ball there. He absolutely controlled this game, and at half time I sat down with myself, I said, well, if that's the way a good player plays, it looks like that's the way I'm going to have to be. And I started following him around the ground. I got a few kicks after that. But I went back to my own club after that, and I've become a bit of a mouth, if you like to call it that way, as far as controlling the game and telling players what to do. Up until then, I was reasonably quiet, but he gave me a great lesson.
And the Swans took heed of that and appointed you captain coach in 1969.
Yeah, 3 hard years. 3 hard years.
You worked hard, Bill, as a coach, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
The club had run right down at that stage.
Yeah. We had we went through my first year after I'd done my first year coaching. I sat down with the board at the time and said, we just can't get anywhere with the players we have. There are players there who are good players but will not make a grand final for us. We just have to start again. So I went out for 2 years, worked very hard getting players into our club, and we bought something like about big numbers of kids from the country, but 23 of the kids I brought through all went on and either played AFL football or played premiership football for Swans.
Can we name some of them, like Beecroft, Boucher?
Yeah, Bobby Beecroft, Boucher, Nawatneys, Gillespie's, Travonovich's, Sidebottoms. That's a few of the names of the kids who went on. Gary McDonald, who went to St Kilda. Now you've got me, Keith. But there was 23 of them all together who went on and played a large, significant role in Swans in the years to come. Because Jack Ensor took over from me, and the players who we'd put into the system had only played maybe 20 games, 25, 30 games when Jack took over. And his first year he found it hard, and then they got their 50, 60 games up, and then they become a very strong side.
So looking at the records, it looked quite a fruitless exercise, your 3 years as a coach, but it wasn't, was it?
Oh no, it laid a fairly big foundation for our successes, which weren't real successes because we didn't win a premiership, but we should have done under Jack Ensor. We just didn't finish our seasons off. One year we won the Rodriguez Shield, a couple of years after I'd finished coaching. So they were quite successful. Frustrating for the club because they expected once we got there that we would go on and emulate what we'd done in 61, 2 and 3 and 4, 5. But it wasn't to be, and a lot of the players, when Jack was moved out, a chap called Stuart McGee took over, and then from then a lot of players left the club and took the march to Melbourne, the Sidebottoms, the Beecrofts and McDonalds. So we lost a big nucleus of our side. So then John Todd came over and he had to start again as well.
'69 Carnival in Adelaide must have given you a lot of satisfaction.
Yeah, it did, Keith. I made
All-Australian selection.
Yeah, I got my All-Australian blazer, which is the epitome of playing at the top level in West Australia at the time, was to make an All-Australian side. And I was very pleased that I...
Incredible Carnival. That's when Polly was made a reserve in one game, wasn't it?
Yes, Mel Atwell was coaching, I think. And Polly was a reserve, didn't come on until I think it was halfway through the third quarter, and ended up winning the Simpson medal. Yeah.
Incredible. But you could almost understand Mel's thinking. I mean, Polly was, what, 34, 35 years of age then?
Yes, yeah.
And he wanted to save him,
yeah,
and get the best out of him, but he just left it too late.
Yes, yeah.
And you were runner-up to Barry Cable?
For the Simpson,
Sandover?
Of the Sandover that year,
That year,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I polled in each one of the games at the Carnival, which was satisfying for me. I got a vote in each game, but I only got 1/3, and I think I got two-third votes, and I was runner-up to Cabes and Polly, who won the Simpson medal between them.
You had the opportunity to robe the Polly?
Yes. In the game on the MCG, where we just got beaten.
Well, that's 1970.
Yep. And also at the Carnival. He was a very good ruckman.
Yes.
And like all good players, demanded where he wanted you to be, because that's where he was going to put his efforts into to put the ball there. And his protection when he put the ball down was great. He used to use his body to protect you after he hit the ground as well. And we combined very well, particularly on the MCG that day. I think that I took it out of the centre nearly every time it went back to the centre that day.
It's the beauty of state football, Bill, and the camaraderie that was built up in state games from foes in the normal home and away games are quite incredible.
Yes. That's what sport's all about, Keith, isn't it? It's being very competitive and being very socially nice to each other once you get out.
Yep.
A lot of friends.
Yeah. And
today I enjoy the company of guys like Polly and Guy Cabes and guys who I used to play against very much so.
Well, that was 70 was the big game in Melbourne. And if ever you should have won a game on the MCG, Billy, it was that one.
Yes.
I think yourself and Bruce Duperuza were the Rovers. Bruce was there somewhere.
I think Barry was playing in Melbourne at the time.
Yes.
I think Bruce was there, and we should have won that day. And a West Australian beat us too, young Richardson, on the half-forward flank.
Max.
Yeah, and a bloke called Dempsey, Gary Dempsey, never stopped taking a mark right on the square. Show you how it used to affect your legs. I took the ball out of the centre from Polly. I short passed it to Dennis Marshall out on the flank. I then run down, took another kick back from him, a short one across to the centre half forward. He then took off down within 30 metres of the game. I lobbed it across to him again. He had a shot, and Dempsey marked it on the line again.
Didn't make the distance.
Didn't make the distance.
But that was what the MCG was like. We couldn't pick up our legs.
No, we couldn't get, particularly with kicking, we never got any distance compared to the Vicks. And the running, we used to lose our edge of our run after a while too. But the mud used to stick to your boots, and we used to wear long stops because everybody said you had to wear long stops on there. At the end of the day, you had about a stone of Melbourne mud sitting on the bottom of your boots. An old chap told us once that what was to, every time you stop, get down and just pull it out of you there and put some fat or soap on the bottom of your soles. It didn't help me much.
But that was one of the really good performances, and
it was.
I suppose in retrospect it was disappointing because that really should have been a win on the MCG before it was drained. I mean, the MCG nowadays is beautiful because it's magnificently drained and nothing like the ground we used to play on, Bill.
No comparison.
No.
And none of the grounds are. Adelaide's the same. They have Subiaco's a magnificent arena nowadays with the turf and the way they look after it. And gets back to a favourite subject of mine. A lot of older players, with the time they have today and the surfaces they've got, one of the great skills of our game which is gone, which is the drop kick. There is no reason in the world that a chap like a Cable or a Farmer and myself and Skiltons and Aylets and all these sort of players couldn't kick a drop kick in today's ground.
Still place for it in our game?
Yes. It's just as quick to drop kick a ball as it is to drop punt.
It gets there a lot quicker.
Gets there quicker, more accurately. And if a player's running straight in line with his body, one of the things that I look at today and shake my head is when a player in today's standard in AFL football have all the time they have and running free with players blocking for them, which they do more often nowadays, and can't deliver that ball properly. Makes me shake my head. And there's still a room for a skill like that.
Yep.
You know,
I believe so, and Polly does strongly too.
The Barassies and the people like that who couldn't kick a drop kick took it out because there was a lot of mistakes made by players who weren't maybe quite as skilled as some of the guys who used to do it. But there was a role for it. You know, there were some magnificent drop kickers of the ball in the Victorian era as there was in Western Australia. Players who could place the ball from the centre square and through the goals, or from the goals kicking out to the centre square.
Well, the Vics are all drop kickers.
Yes.
On their wet grounds, I mean,
Yes. Yep.
magnificent drop kicks.
Yep.
Witten and players like
Yes.
that.
And on today's surfaces, you know, they'd be magnificent.
Yeah. Well, you played brilliantly on the Melbourne cricket ground, and then you went down to Tasmania and lost by 4 points. Was there a bit of celebrating, Billy, or?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a letdown, Keith, you know, after performing so well. Yeah, it was a bit of a letdown.
Then you came home and thrashed South Australia by 10 or 12 goals.
Yes, yeah.
Was that the game that Chubby Styles played very well in?
I think it was, Keith.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you played well also again.
Yes, yeah.
Well, 71, and that was your last year as coach. And again, nothing much happened. You finished sixth, but all these guys that you'd recruited were at the club at this stage, and it was just a matter of time.
Yeah, and I didn't think I was good enough as a coach. I was physically and mentally drained at that stage, and the effort I'd put in, I suppose, with the recruiting, and I'd basically made it a full-time job, which I wasn't being paid to do. And I was pretty tired at the end of that, and I didn't believe that I could give the job. And if I'd stayed on another 2 or 3 years, I would have, I guess, got the rewards. But I remember sitting down with the board and just saying to them, I don't believe I can do credit to it anymore. I'd rather just concentrate on being a player.
Well, Jack Ensor was the assistant coach at Perth, had been a great junior coach, and he was appointed at Swans. And really, his 4 years there, apart from the first year, were very successful.
Jack Ensor really should have been kept at Swans. I guess if Jack had a bit of a fault, it was he wasn't hard enough on some of his good players to demand a bit more of them. But in saying that, he was a very astute coach, had a great knowledge of the game, and had very good techniques in his what he wanted the players to do. No, he's a good coach for Swans, Jack Ensor.
I thought I learnt more. I was with Jack Ensor for a couple of years. I learnt more off Jack Ensor than any other coach regarding coaching a football team.
Yep. No, he is very good.
Well, you lost in 74. Well, 74 was when your recruited boys started coming through. Beecroft, Nawatney, Gary McDonald. They started to come to the fore about that stage. And you made the finals.
Yes.
And you lost a preliminary final to Perth by 3 goals. I often think of Jack Ensor against Perth. I mean, he was so red and black before he came to Swans. And there he was pitted against Ken Armstrong, who'd been his tutor for so long. And
no different to a bloke called Keith Slater leaving Swans and going to Subiaco. And that to me was the worst thing that a player could do. And I told you once on the ground, you whacked me one.
I didn't whack you.
Yes, you did.
You called on Big Fred because I just give you a little tap behind the head. But it wouldn't have cost Swans much to keep me, you know.
See, you were mercenary, Keith. See, you were too mercenary.
75, you lost a preliminary final again to South Fremantle by 2 goals, and you really did kick yourself out of that. You kicked 12-21 in the game.
That's
You
right.
remember that game?
Yes, I do. Yep.
Yep. And West Perth were premiers that year.
Yep.
And I think in fact, I think that year you played in the second semi-final. You finished second to West Perth.
Yes,
didn't
we
you?
did. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And then Jack, after 75, he was sacked, which always surprised me. Stewie McGee took over as a playing coach.
Yeah, and that was a terrible decision by our club at the time, much to the extent that one of the guys who was on the board at the time said to us that the guy they'd recruited, they thought they'd recruited a chap called McGee, who was a fairly tough sort of a player, playing for Richmond. And we ended up with Stewie, who was a running player, and certainly not a tough player. And all the talk about Jack not being a strong enough coach to his players, or he didn't have a strong enough player within the club, was made laughable because the person they brought over was young Stewie, who really wasn't a coach. It was his first ever stint into coaching. He'd been a running player for Victorian sides over there, Footscray, I think he came from. Real nice fella, but certainly wasn't a coach.
He was a bit of a fitness fanatic.
Yeah, he could run all. He'd be a good player in today's setup, the way they run all the time. But he certainly wasn't a coach. He would have to be, if you of the coaches who I played under, he would have had to be the worst coach I've ever been under. He had no idea.
Yeah, well, that year you played your 300th game.
Yes, I did.
And that was a real target for you to get to that 300.
Well, it just seemed to happen because the end of the year when Jack Ensor had finished, I also notified the club that I was retiring at the end of the year, and they talked me back in because they needed said that they needed my experience to help McGee because it was first year in coaching and certainly needed somebody like myself around to see him through his first year. So they talked me back into playing again, which wasn't a good thing because I wasn't fit at the start of the season. I cracked a collarbone and a shoulder, I should say. I had a cracked bone in the shoulder. I had a broken bone in my foot through the scratch matches, and I was playing on needles, and I wasn't fit enough to play waffle football.
And you were touching 35.
Yes, which doesn't help matters. And so I guess I was lucky to play 300 games. I really shouldn't have played 300. But as time goes on and the memories come back, it was great to be able to achieve 300 games.
Yeah, wonderful achievement, and for a guy that came down to play just 1 year.
Yeah, that caused a lot of talk and fun over the years.
Yeah. Was there a highlight game, Bill? I mean, you retired at the end of that season as a player.
Yes.
But was there a highlight game that really stands out in your mind?
Yes, I think there's. I guess the '61 Grand Final will always stand out in my mind as one of the great things to be involved in. I played reasonably well, as did yourself on those particular days. I guess most of the players all played a reasonably good game that day. But it was just achieving the epitome in what no one ever thought we'd ever be able to do.
No.
Certainly when I went with Swans in the first year, the talk was winning more games than the year before, which was zilch. So it was all about having a good season. And so that was a great achievement. You know, the whole district got behind it. It was quite a phenomenon in those days, and I just got caught up in it. So yeah, the '61 Grand Final, I guess, will always stand out in my mind as the great highlights of my life.
I could never work out whether Bunton was a psychologist or a con man.
Well, coaches are.
I mean, he really got the best out of everyone, didn't he?
Well, yeah. All coaches, good coaches, the Buntons, the Todds, the Sheedies, the Parkins, they get the best out of what players they've got, and that's the signs of a good coach because they analyse their players and they test them all the time, and they either con them or they just test them. That's their psychology, because at a given time they have to know on the given day, which is Grand Final day, what they can do with their players, and circumstances will always prevail a particular strategic move in a game because something's happened to your game plan, as they call it today, and you've got to grab a Nawatney, as Todd did, and put him to full forward, as Mel Atwill did and put himself to full forward and won a game. No one ever thought of Mel Atwill being at full forward. He wins a Grand Final for them because he knew his own ability, but coaches have got to be able to do that. And if you call it conning, well, they're good con men.
Was there a state game that stood out in your mind?
Yeah, two of them, I think. One was the South Australian game here where I played pretty well, 67, yeah. And on the MCG.
70.
Yeah, I was voted best on the ground for that game, and I really got a buzz out of nearly beating the Vicks. And yeah, they were two of the games that stand out.
Billy, you were really entrenched at Swan Districts at the time of retirement, and it didn't take you long to get into administration.
No, when I finished playing, Keith, there was quite a big void there. I went back the following year because I kept training with the players at the end of the year, that year. Then the first game of the following year I went in, John Todd had been appointed, and I went in and congratulated him, and because I didn't know John, I hadn't met John before, and went up to Stan Watney, had been made captain, and wished him all the best, and walked outside and really felt as though I shouldn't have been there. I felt rather uncomfortable. So I went to walk out, and a chap called John Cooper grabbed us and took us upstairs and said, sit up here with us. So I went upstairs and sat with them up there, and it only lasted half a game. I couldn't get over the comments being made by all and sundry about the players out there. So I moved out and wandered off home, and then I got a phone call about being a state selector, which I became a selector that particular year, which was great because it allowed me to move back into the game and keep a little bit of involvement. Otherwise, more than likely wouldn't have come back into football if I hadn't been made a state selector. And I'd done that for a couple of years, and then John Todd and John Cooper were finding it very difficult to get things through at the club because John Cooper and JT were fairly volatile fellas, and they were battling to get a lot of the things which Coop believed Toddy was capable of doing through at board level. So out of frustration, Cooper came to a few of us, and I think you might have been included, and said, I need some help because John Todd is a good coach, but we haven't, the board at the time, I can't get anything through. And so I pulled the short straw at that particular time, and I said I'd come in for 1 year along with Castleton and Slater and Nesbitt and a few others, and Lawson come in after me, so we had a continuity of maybe ex-players in there. And a lot of credit has never been given to guys like Rod Sargent and Lindsay Johnson, who also come on board with myself to try and help John Cooper and Todd achieve what they wanted, which we did. And it caused a lot of heartaches within our club at the time because a lot of people were moved out, and the whole internal working of the club changed dramatically. Became more professional, we got very professional people onto the boards, and the whole club just started to turn around. JT started to have success.
Well, his first 3 years there were anything but successful.
Yes, and we started, John Cooper asked me to be football director, and which JT looked upon as rather sceptically because being an ex-player or an ex-coach, and so as soon as John made the announcement I rang Toddy up and asked him to have a talk with him. And I sat down with him and I said, I don't know how you view it, but this is the role I'm going to play, but I just want to point out to you that I've been there and done it, and I'll give you 3 assurances. 1, that I will not interfere with your coaching. No matter what you do out coaching, I will not interfere with that. I will not be part of your selection of players or on the selection committee. I have one role to play, and that is to do what you want me to do and get the players you want. I said, that's my whole role. If there's something which you do, which is against my club, I'll argue with you. But that will be my role. I've given you that assurance. And he looked at me rather sceptically, and I guess he'd had a few tough times from different people in my role. And I guess over a few years I gained his confidence because whenever he wanted a particular player, I went out and got the best that was available for him, and wheeled and dealed and sold players, and allowed him to continue in his role solely as a coach, which is what he wanted to do, with no interference from a board. So that was my philosophies because I'd been there and done all that, and I knew just what a board member, the influence and the bad influence they can have sometimes, because if you go back to your board after being involved with the emotions of the playing side, you go back to the board with a emotional view instead of a clinical view. So I had 2 roles to play. I had to keep that emotions out of the football. So we were quite successful.
You, it must have appealed to your administration because you took over as vice president. Obviously, heir apparent to John Cooper in 80, and I think you went through to 82 as vice president. And when John retired after winning a premiership in 1982, then you did take over the presidency and won another 2 premierships to give us another hat-trick.
Yes, right. Yeah, well, John Cooper had enough, and also things were starting to change a bit. You know, the club had a huge debt at that stage of some $900,000. John had put a huge effort in, as he always does with his football, into the club, and so the next era had to be taken over, I guess, by somebody fresh, and I certainly wasn't going to do it. John just said, right, that's it, I've had enough, and just dropped off. And a few of the names were being thrown up to take over from John, and the board who were there at the time talked us into doing it. So I was a bit of a reluctant president, because we tried very hard to keep Cooper there, because he and Todd had a good relationship. And so it didn't really appeal for me. I guess I got taken in there really on the wish of other people to a certain extent, Joe. Okay.
Well, I suppose at that stage too, the kids were starting to grow up. I mean, you married Glenys in 1962, and you had Greg and Teresa and Brett.
Yes.
And they were getting to an age where they were about to start going their own way a little bit. So I suppose you had a little bit more time on your hands about then.
Yeah. I was very lucky in those days. I had a wife who reminded me that my children were growing up on me, because I was very much involved in business at the end of my footy career, and footy had taken up a big part of my life. And she reminded me that the kids were growing up and they'd be gone in a few years. So yeah, I made sure I had plenty of time to put into my family at that stage.
You picked another winner there too, didn't you, with Glenys?
Oh yes, yeah, very true.
Mm.
Yeah, very
so she's
true.
been a good supporter right through.
Yes, very good supporter.
Well, you had the all of a sudden you were on the. When did you become a delegate on the West Australian Football League?
When I became
Commission?
president.
In 83.
Whenever I became president,
Yeah,
83.
then you
yeah.
became a delegate on the board.
Yes.
You made a bit of noise there, Billy.
Keith, I'm very passionate about my football, and as much as I hate to say it, some of the things I brought up then which other people couldn't see has happened, and it will continue to happen as well unless the Commission review or football reviews the Commission on the manner in which they're conducting football in Western Australia at the moment. I'm still very passionate about it, and during those stages there, I believe very strongly that the Commission got carried away with the hype of privately owned football clubs and the American style, etc. And that's when we got caught up with the formation of the Indian Pacifics, and consequently they lost something like $10 million in their workouts, which was disastrous for West Australian football, because the whole idea of getting a franchise from the Victorians was to make money out of it, not lose $10 million out of football. So they certainly went about it the wrong way, and I guess I wasn't as diplomatic as I should have been in a lot of occasions with a lot of the personnel there. But what frustrated me is that they couldn't see the harm they were going to do to Western Australian, and the whole idea of getting a franchise was to benefit Western Australia. And the hoo-ha about saving our players from going to Melbourne has been proved wrong, because the draft was in then, and it was always, we were never going to keep our players at any rate over here in Western Australia.
We did need a national competition, Billy, because every club in Australia was feeling the pinch financially. Yes. And what's happened now, of course, we've got the national competition and we've got the big dollars, but the West Australian clubs are still effectively broke.
Yes, it was the way it was all put together, Keith. There was always to be a national competition, and no one more than I realised that, because a chap called Tom Stanage, who's a good friend of mine, Professor Tom Stanage, were the instigators of a fund from Canberra to look at the possibility of a national competition. That was well before it even started. And we got that grant, but they wouldn't give it to individuals or give it to Western Australia, because it had to go to the national body, which at that stage was the NFL, which is the national football, which was controlled by the Victorians. And so the grant couldn't come to Western Australia to look at the possibility of a national competition. So I've always believed in a national competition well before anybody in Western Australia had really mooted it. Alan Aylett, who was in charge of the NFL at the time, grabbed the grant and got his CEO from North Melbourne the money to look at the possibility of a national competition. So Alan Aylett was one of the instigators of it all, along with his offsider, who was the CEO at the time. And from there it grew. But I was very well aware of a national competition. And so I've always believed there had to be a national competition, always. But it was the way it was going to be put together. And unfortunately, a lot of high rollers wanted to get involved in a privately owned club, and they held football to ransom over here on numerous occasions in the early days by threatening the waffle of getting a licence themselves and starting up. And it panicked football in a lot of ways to do what they did. And it is being proved now that the concept which South Australia put together, which incidentally is also being put into New South Wales and also into Queensland as being the best system in Australia, we had the ideal opportunity in the early days to put ours in the same vogue. But unfortunately it didn't happen that way. And that's where my criticism came in, because we allowed the high rollers of the day to determine the future of West Australian football.
Well, it's year 2000.
Yep.
We can't go back and
Nope.
make any changes, but
Nope.
what needs to happen now with West Australian football?
Well, there certainly has to be a review of the role the West Australian Football Commission have at the moment. That includes the two AFL sides and their structure. It must always be owned, the licences must always be owned by football. The Commission's role has to be looked at, and there's supposed to be reviews done every 5 years, and not a review by themselves, but a review by a very independent group of people to pick out which is the best for Western Australia, whatever system is best in Australia for Western Australia. Because at the moment, if we're not careful, the rest of football in Western Australia is going to be in dire tragedy without a role to play.
Well, most of the clubs have a shortfall of about $30,000 to $40,000 a year, which seem to compound every year.
Yes. And what's happened at Swans this year is just a band-aid effect for clubs. Well, last year it was West Perth, who were supposed to be in the epitome of this movement of clubs out into the back to the people, and they had something like 200,000. East Perth and Perth are still struggling. Claremont, all clubs are going to struggle. But it's not only finance. It is a case of player drain. It is a case of finance, and it's a case of setting up a model club and costing it out. And I don't believe the Commission have any idea on what a model club should be for Western Australia. And I believe they've got to get some outside people to look at their role.
Swans have got the opportunity to put a blueprint in place now.
I think football has. I think McKinnon...
But someone's got to lead the way.
Someone has to, and the only people who can lead the way, because of the control they have, is the Commission. And they fail to show that leadership at any stage, and unless there's a role for the waffle clubs to play, and they haven't a role at the moment, with the FDT taking over all their control of juniors, most of their control, and players, for example, Perth last year had the makings of a good side. 5 or 6 of their kids at 16 and 17 or 18, whatever their ages are today, have been taken away without any input into Western Australia. Now, that to me is a national problem, but it is a West Australian problem as well.
Well, Billy, Toddy went off to coach the Eagles.
Yes.
Ed Blackaby took over at Swans.
Yes.
And then Todd, after his stint with the Eagles, replaced Blackaby.
Yes.
And right out of the blue, won a premiership in 1990.
Well, not really right out of the blue. Blackaby had done a fairly good job. We'd been online the year before, and we lost our last 4 games. The wheels fell off in the last 4 or 5 games, and Ed missed out. But Ed's first year was fairly ordinary because he didn't put the time in. Yeah. And then I put a lot of controls around him with chaps like Close and different people like that, which helped him out. Ed was a fairly determined young fella who wanted to do it his own way. But the wheels fell off at the end. But he had a reasonably good side, and Todd just the following year the wheels started to fall off as well, and Todd was good enough to put the wheels back on again, and we went on and won a premiership.
And it was, I'd have to say it was unexpected, and it broke the pattern a bit, Billy, too. I mean, if you win a premiership, Swans are supposed to win 3.
Better tell Toddy that.
Well, I think it was 1996 you were admitted or inducted into the AFL Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that was a great honour.
And that was about the best 100 footballers in the history of the game.
Yeah, that's how they made the criteria up. They selected 100 top players, as you say, in the first 100 years of football to put it into the Hall of Fame over in Melbourne. So it was a great honour. There was only a couple of us who hadn't actually played VFL football who got inducted from Western Australia.
Yeah, wonderful career you've had, Billy, and you know, it's interesting to look at 40 years, and you've been just actively involved almost the whole 40 years that you've been in the metro area.
Yeah, well, it's been a big part of my life, Keith. One, I've had an enormous amount of enjoyment out of. One, I still get a lot of fun out of. I still go.
Well, you must have enjoyed Greg also. I mean, he won a Simpson medal in the
yes,
grand final,
yeah,
1990.
I was very proud of young Greg. He gave everything he had. He was a very dedicated kid to Swans. JT gave him a pretty tough time and got the best out of him. And he idolises the guy. And he's back down there now,
Exactly.
putting a bit back in with John as a skills coach of some sort. And so, yeah, I've been pretty proud of him. I was very proud of my youngest guy.
Well, he wasn't the worst player either around the place.
He was a good player. He played very well in his Colts in his first year. Then he played seconds and at stages was on the verge of being maybe given an opportunity to play league football, and he pulled an Achilles heel right out of its socket. And he never ever got it back. He tried. He's very much a frustrated young footballer who would have loved to play, and often said to his big brother when he may have had a grumble or two about things in football, he said, "You've played 150, I haven't played one yet." But he was a good player, a different player to Greg and myself. He was a pretty tough player. If he got his opportunity, he could have been a bit like a Don Langsford. Pretty tough and run straight through, not fast, but great skills both sides of his bodies.
Bill, I've asked you about your highlight game. Who's the best footballer you've ever seen? I know that's a tall order, but there's usually someone over the course of your career that you really think was a bit better than the others.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson I ever got from the best rover in Australia was Bobby Skilton.
What a catastrophe, Bill, that he never played in any premiership sides.
Yes.
I think one final round game.
One final with South Melbourne, yep. And but he was a very, very good player. You know, I look at in Western Australia, and I guess Cable was an outstanding player. The short stint that Donkin had here was a very good player. You go through the lineups of players of my own club, and Ken Bagley, who was quite an outstanding player. Very hard to put the best in any era or in any club, because opposition players, you only play them every now and again. But you know, Ken Bagley, to my mind, stands out as one of the most gifted players, who never really achieved what he should have done either.
And they begged him to go to North Melbourne, didn't they?
He would have been an outstanding player over there, but Ken wasn't a real confident person, and really liked his home and the surroundings he was in. But he would have been an outstanding player in Melbourne.
Did you feel subjected to any tagging at all when you played?
Well, I think every time you went out, they call it tagging today. I think you used to play on somebody, you know. And if you're a forward pocket player, the back pocket player took you on and went on the ball. Either the centreman or somebody tagged you, as they call it today, or played on you, and were told to do exactly the same as they do today.
Who's the toughest back pocket player you played on?
Oh, they're all tough.
I asked Bunton about had he had any experience in a forward pocket. He said never.
Yeah, well, one of the funny instances with Jack Sheedy, and I only played a couple of games against Jack, because in '61 that was his last year, I think. And he was in the back pocket this particular day, my first ever game against East Perth at Bassendean Oval. And we'd been playing reasonably well, and I come running out of the forward line, took a mark on my chest, and Jack hit me from the top of my ears to the bottom of my toes, and with everything he had. Hit the ground, and Ray Montgomery, who didn't get on too well with Jack, I found out afterwards, come back and gave him 15 metres. And so I picked up the ball and walked back with a cheeky grin and went up to him and said, "You've got to do better than that, old fella." And he said to us, "Take one step closer and I will, young fella."
And he would have?
He would have. And I roved the next 3 quarters around the centre of the ground. Yeah, no, most back pocket plays, you could get up a lot of, you know, Dobby Graham was always hard. You could frustrate Dobby by going into the centre of the ground. He couldn't handle the centre of the grounds. He used to go for the boundaries with his kicks all the time, but he was a very good back pocket player. Chubby Styles was a tough player. Stan Badham was a tough player. Yeah, they're all fairly, back pocket players in those days were
Pretty good players.
good players.
Most of them could go in the centre.
Yep.
Mickey
Yep.
Maynard, for instance.
Oh yes, yep. Kenny Cooper. Yep. They really were a back pocket player or a centreman, weren't they, in those days? Yep.
Who's the best coach you played under, Bill?
Well, they all had big influences on us, Keith. Bunton taught me I guess the discipline of what was required to play football. He used to take us training, and we'd all come back tonguing, and then he'd go off himself and run again, do the course himself again. He taught me that. Castleline taught me about dedication. Fred was an ordinary footballer, they tell me, before I come down. He got himself through the ranks by just pure will.
Might have played 100 seconds games.
Yep. Yeah, just pure will to get through.
But did really work hard on his game, like developing his left foot and his pace.
Yep. And then Tony Nesbitt. Tony just really taught me, what would you call it, dedication to a club. Just what a club
Never
really
say
means.
die.
And would never give up. He just taught me that you had to have a strong feeling for the game and for the club. Yeah, those three had a fairly big influence on my life in football.
You're happy with the 3 umpire system?
Not really. I think it's a bit of a joke.
2 enough?
Yeah, 2 is more than ample. The game is not that much. It's faster, but it's not that fast. I see umpires today completely out of position, and they're supposed to be able to be in, with 3 of them there, see all the things that happen. But they have not enough space, I don't believe, to be able to get themselves in a position. You don't have to be right where a mistake is being happened. You've got to be in a position where you can see it. And I just believe that they encroach too close to the game with 3 of them there. And, if you see some tapes of yesterday's football, it looks a little bit funny and looks a lot slower than it was today. But I don't believe that the players are a great deal faster than they were before. They move the ball on at all costs a lot quicker now. And maybe you need 2 umpires, but I don't believe you need 3.
And where to in the year 2000 for Bill Walker, football-wise?
Oh, nothing in football, Keith. Once I moved out of Swans and moved out of the commission area, I'd done my stint, given it my best shot, thoroughly enjoyed it. Go back now and help the club in different areas without not many people knowing about it, and thoroughly enjoy the game. Very passionate towards football still, and but nothing involvement.
Congratulations on a magnificent contribution to West Australian football.
Thanks very much, Keith.
Yeah, very well.
Bailey, and he's just yeah. He's not going to be any. I said you're going to. I just said over there, it's like this. It couldn't really use it. It was like. Those got really.